Hello everyone, thank you for attending today's Watershed webinar, Dragons and Damsels of Pennsylvania. Our presenter is Dr. Lane Loya, Professor of Biology at St. Francis University.
All right, thank you, Michael, and thanks to all of you for joining in today and allowing me to share a little bit about my experiences and knowledge about dragonflies. Like Michael said, the purpose of today is to talk a little bit about the ecology and behavior of dragonflies. We'll talk about their association with aquatic habitats, and I hopefully can give you some ideas on maybe some resources and projects to use, but most of it is just a chance to learn about these remarkable, beautiful, and somewhat mysterious creatures. Certainly that would be my goal. If you learn a few things about their biology today, that would be great. So we'll start with this slide, and I put this on just to kind of introduce the question, what is a dragonfly? Well, with these images, I want you to take a look at the anatomy, and they're insects, of course, you know that, but if I were to ask you what characteristics do all insects share, you would probably say head, thorax, abdomen, 2 pairs of wings, 6 legs, and you can see many of those features on this particular slide. And it's just variation on theme. That's what the various orders of insects are, and the dragonfly order has its own set of unique twists on that variation. So if you look at the head, they're all eyes. That is a visually oriented organism. You look at the thorax, it's for powerful locomotion. The 2 wings that are attached to the thorax are strong, thin, and powerful, and it makes them really great flyers. And that abdomen you see on the bottom, long, narrow, a good rudder for their maneuvers. And it really shows you the basic body plan of the dragonfly. When I switch to this photo, you get a little different perspective on some more of the anatomy. And I want you to first look at the head. Look how much of that head is eye. Those eyes wrap around front to back, so they have vision that's, not quite 360, but pretty close to it. The only spot where they can't see is perhaps right behind where the head enters the thorax, right behind the head. If I were to say to you, okay, well, what's one other characteristic of insects? You'd all probably say, oh, well, they have 2 antennae. And you'll notice the antennae on these guys are very, very small. So find the head, these 2 little bristles that stick out in front of the eye, those are the antennae. So very, very small antennae. They're visual creatures. They don't have much of a sense of smell at all. If I were to ask you, okay, how many legs does any insect have? You'd say 6. So you can see the 3 pairs of legs and how modified they are for holding on and perching and grabbing their prey. Let's see, what else do you see? Okay, so one of the questions that often pops up is, how do you tell a male dragonfly from a female dragonfly? And some species you can tell by the coloration, of course, just like in birds, but the real characteristics are that you look for the reproductive organs. So the arrow that you see in that diagram is pointing to a male. That's its reproductive organs. And dragonflies are very fascinating in terms of their reproductive biology, and we'll show you some more images a little bit later, but the arrow is pointing to the second abdominal segment, and that's what the male uses as his copulatory organs, but the organs that actually produce the sperm are at the tip of the abdomen. So more to come on that later, but I just wanted to point out, if you see that little kind of protrusion towards the beginning of the abdomen, end of the thorax, that's an indication that it's male. The females are just kind of smooth and don't have that prominence there. The last thing I'll point out is, if you find the legs, look at the middle and last pair of legs, and you'll see a little round dot right above those middle pair of legs. Those are the breathing holes, the spiracles. So dragonflies use a lot of oxygen to power that rapid flight that they have. So like all insects, they use those little breathing tubes to bring oxygen into the body and don't breathe at all through their mouth or through the nose. So all those little spiracles line the thorax and then the whole way back the abdomen. So there's a little bit about dragonfly anatomy. So what is a dragonfly? An insect with those modifications that we just talked about. You'll notice that the title of the presentation was Dragons and Damsels of Pennsylvania. So we've got our first multiple choice question here, first poll question. What's one main difference between a dragonfly and a damselfly? So go ahead and chime in. Dragonflies are adults, while the damselflies are nymphs. Dragonfly refers to the males, while damselfly refers to the females. Dragonflies are thicker bodied, while damselflies are more slender. Or D, dragonflies have 2 pairs of wings, while damselflies have 1. What do you think? Looks like we're getting most folks in. Well, we have one person that got it right.
There we go.
The main difference is anatomical. Dragonflies are just thicker bodied and damselflies are more slender. So let me show you some more images of those dragonflies and damselflies to show you those differences. All right. So this is a little illustration I found online to show you some of the main differences. So first of all, notice the thicker, chunky, shorter body of the dragonfly and the long, thin, narrow abdomen in particular of the damselfly on the left. Eyes are a giveaway. So a damselfly usually has hammerhead-like heads. So the eyes are out at the tips of the head, and a dragonfly is usually, not always, but usually meet in the middle, and they're definitely larger. Dragonflies are just better flyers. The wings are larger and more powerful. And when they land, a dragonfly usually has the wings outstretched, and usually a damselfly will have the wings positioned back over the abdomen. There are some differences with the wing shape, but those that you see on this particular slide are the easiest ones. So here's a typical damselfly. See the slender body, especially the abdomen. Eyes at the tips of the head, wings generally, I wouldn't say folded flat against the body, but folded back over top of the body and not outstretched. Usually, the wings are folded over the body. There are some groups of damselflies called the spread wings that have them slightly open, more like a dragonfly. But I like this picture because you can see, even though the forewing, the front wing is a little bit bigger than the hind wing, the general shape is about the same size. To show those differences in a dragonfly, again, chunkier body, eyes bigger, touching in the middle. You'll notice that the wings are held flat when they land. And then look at the shape of the wings. The front wings and the hind wings are big, but the hind wings are a little bit bigger, so a wider wing, and just a little bit different shape. If you'll notice towards the abdomen, that area is much more elongated than that same area at the front, on the front wing. So we're going to do a little interaction here. So I'll show you some images and you have to test yourself. You have 3 choices. Is the image a dragonfly? Is it a damselfly? Or is it neither one? Dragonfly, damselfly, or neither? This is not a poll question, so I'll just wait 3 seconds and then I'll reveal the answer. So if you said that's a damselfly, you're correct. That's a type of damselfly we have around here called the violet dancer. Again, note the wing position, note the slender body, note the eyes at the end of the head. Is this a dragonfly, a damselfly, or neither? I'll give you 3 seconds. If you said neither, you're correct. That's neither a dragonfly or a damselfly. It's actually a strange kind of an insect. You may have heard of antlions before. Antlions have a dragonfly-like body, but one of the things that you should have noticed right away is the long antennae on the antlion. No dragonfly has antennae like that. All right, dragonfly, damselfly, or neither one. If you said dragonfly, that's correct. That's another common one we have around here that you've probably seen before. A smaller one called the blue dasher. Wings spread when they land, thicker, chunkier body, eyes meeting in the middle. I have 2 more. Here's the first. So, dragonfly, damselfly, or neither one. I'm sure you're getting good at this now so that you recognize that that's a damselfly. That's a beautiful damselfly we have that likes to hang around streams called the ebony jewel wing. What a beautiful name for a dragonfly, and it's just a good reminder of how wonderful these organisms are to look at. The colors are quite amazing. I apologize. These are just a lot of my own images that I took with cell phones or with really old cameras, and they're not stunning, but the point is I just wanted to let you see some variation of some of our local species. All the pictures, most of the pictures have been taken in Pennsylvania, or at least on the East Coast, in various habitats that I've been to. Here's your last one. Dragonfly, damselfly, or neither one? Well, this was a pretty easy one. This, of course, is neither one. This is a crane fly. Some people call them giant mosquitoes, although they are not mosquitoes at all. They don't suck blood like mosquitoes do. But you'll notice they only have one pair of wings. They have a little bit longer antennae, and those are definitely not a damselfly or dragonfly. All right. If you have any questions, please jump in at any time. So dragonflies and damselflies together constitute the order Odonata. So you remember your classification, I'm sure, kingdom, phylum, order, and so forth. So all insects are in the same class Insecta, and then those are broken down into about 30 some different orders. So all dragonflies and all damselflies belong to the same order, the order Odonata. So Odonata is a funny word. It's actually not a very good name for a description of the order. It just means toothed. And I put this image of a dragonfly upside down just to show its head. There's little teeth on the head and of course teeth on the legs, but most insects have teeth somewhere on their mandibles, so it's not a very good name. It's just an older name, so it stuck around. But if you ever hear anybody a scientist that studies dragonflies or damselflies, they're called odonatologists. And the capturing of odes is oding, just like birding. So ode is that prefix that means tooth. Dragonflies would be one suborder, damselflies would be another suborder. So their similarities are close enough that they are considered in the same order taxonomically. All right, we're up to a little bit more of some ecology, so I'll let Michael pop this poll question up. So one of the important considerations of their ecology is what they eat. So what do they eat? A, they're all predators. B, they're all herbivores. C, they're omnivores. Or D, some are predators, while some species are herbivores. I'll let you answer that question. I probably let the answer slip out somewhere earlier there. Okay. We have everybody answering and we have the majority correct. They all are predators. So dragonflies are predators, damselflies are predators, every single species. There are no herbivorous species that are known, and that predation applies to both the adults and the larval forms that we're going to talk about in a little bit. So they are just like spiders, 100% predaceous. So what do they eat? Well, the answer short is anything that they can catch. They will fly around and pretty much take any flying insect that they can. This is a picture of a common pond hawk feeding on a mayfly. You can see the little filaments coming out the back end of the mayfly. So anything that they can overpower. Some dragonflies will perch and then fly out and grab an insect and land and eat it. And other insects will just be constantly flying, and when they see something, dart and go get it. So we call some dragonflies, they have a hawking behavior. So if they're on the wing flying around and they see an insect and they fly and go get it, that's a hawking behavior. And some are more ambushers. They'll sit there waiting for something to fly past, and they'll go and grab it. Damselflies are often described as gleaners. And so they aren't strong flyers like dragonflies. So damselflies, like you see this eastern forktail here, they'll just kind of sit on some vegetation and sometimes crawl and grab an insect, or make a short flight and grab an insect and just glean the insects that it's eating off the plants. And here you can see that this eastern forktail has a blowfly in its mouth. I think one of my students took this picture a long time ago. And here's another damselfly eating a fly as well. So flies, mayflies, other species of dragonflies and damselflies anything that they can overpower, they'll eat as adults. And it kind of brings me to one of the benefits of dragonflies. I know it's kind of an anthropocentric viewpoint. What do they do for us? But I mean, that is an important consideration. Do they play any beneficial role in terms of assisting humans? And the answer is certainly yes. One of the most important prey items of dragonflies and damselflies are mosquitoes and blowflies. And if they're helping to regulate those populations of organisms that can spread disease to us, then all the better. One of the things that gives them such a powerful ability to find their prey is that wonderful eyesight. And I just put this image up to show you how big the eyes are relative to the head. They're almost all eyes. And it was also a good reminder to me to share with you that studies have shown that they're one of the most efficient predators known, meaning if they see an organism to eat and they fly after it, 95% of the time they'll be able to catch it. Large predators like lions and tigers, I mean, they might have 20, 25% efficiency. So dragonflies are some of the most efficient predators in terms of their success rates. And it's no doubt with those eyes and that ability to fly forwards, backwards, up, down, they make for pretty efficient predators. And I also wanted to show you this picture. I caught this spatterdock darner and I was holding it there and I was remarking how long those legs are and how spiny the legs are. I also the eyes are such beautiful color in this particular species. I took that picture up near Blacklick Creek in Cambria County. But anyways, some of the bigger hawkers will form this basket with their legs. So they'll be flying and they'll catch something and they'll use their legs to kind of grip and hold it there. And almost like a shopping cart as a person is going around a store filling up their basket. Dragonflies will do that and they'll actually catch a couple prey at once and eat on the wing or perch and hold them there with those spines as they feed. I thought that was kind of an interesting behavior. All right, we're up to a little bit about the ecology of the nymphs. Okay, so where would you find a dragonfly nymph? Your choices are in the soil, in streams and ponds, flying around with the adults, but they're just littler, or inside other animals that they're parasitic. Go ahead and answer that one. And it looks like most of you got that one correct. The connection, why this whole presentation connects to watershed, is their association with aquatic habitats. So you will find adults flying around the water mostly. You'll find some away from the water feeding, but they'll return usually to water. And that's because all of the nymphs are aquatic, either in mud, in flowing water, in rivers, in ponds, in lakes. They have to have an aquatic habitat, a freshwater habitat, to go through their metamorphosis. So I'll share with you a little bit more about the nymph anatomy and behavior. All right, so I'm showing you now a picture of a dragonfly nymph. And just as far as terminology goes, in the United States, biologists seem to prefer the term nymph or even naiad, an aquatic stage of an organism who doesn't go through a complete metamorphosis. There's no pupa stage, so no resting stage in between the nymphs and the adults. But the nymphs are aquatic and do look quite a bit different than the adults. I mean, that isn't a very pretty looking bug compared to how beautiful the adults are. Some of the anatomical features in dragonflies, stout-bodied. You can see if you look where the wings would be, these wing pads as they develop the wings externally. You see their antennae there, again, not very long and developed. 6 pairs of legs. And one of the cool, interesting facts about them is that they have good eyesight. They're still hunters underwater. So you can see the eyes, the compound eyes are well developed. And probably the funniest fact about them is that their gills, which they breathe with as nymphs, are inside their rectum. So if you've ever maybe caught a dragonfly larvae and you put it down, it'll like kind of propel itself through the water real quickly, almost swimming like, but it's just sucking water into that chamber around where the anus is and then expelling it. And as they do so, it can give them some jet propulsion behavior and certainly exchanges oxygen with the gills there in that part of the body. One of the features of the nymphs that kind of separates them from any other species, or I'm sorry, any other order of insects is the labium. So it's the same picture, just blown up on the right so that you can see the labium a little bit closer. But this is a tiger spike-tailed dragonfly nymph that my students and I caught in our stream at St. Francis. It's actually kind of a rare species. I've never even been able to capture the adults at St. Francis. I've only ever seen the nymphs in the stream. And I just put this illustration on there to show you this crazy mouth part that they have called the labium. All insects have a labium, but their labium almost acts as another set of appendages. So it sticks, it's folded up underneath the head normally, but then when it comes time for them to feed, they'll shoot the labium out and grab their prey with it, and it almost acts as another set of hands that they have to feed with. This is not my picture. It's a much better picture than I could take, but this is showing you a dragonfly, and I want you to find the head, and you'll notice under the head, it looks like another arm there. And that folded structure under the head that will slide back in between the legs is the labium. I have a little video here for you that I'll play. It will show you the labium in action. Michael, are you able to see that video playing?
Yes.
Great. So you see a dragonfly here feeding on some, looks like mosquito larvae. And it doesn't use its legs to feed, but it'll jab that labium out, and the little hooks on the tip of the labium will catch the prey. Here's a slow motion shot of it. So again, good eyesight, grabs it, pulls it into the body to feed. Damselfly nymphs are a little bit different than dragonflies, as you would expect. More soft and slender bodied. Head is very similar shape. You can see the good eyesight there. They also have a labium sticking out underneath the head that they use to feed. And probably the biggest difference is that their gills are not inside the rectal chamber, but there's usually three gills that are kind of sticking out the back end. Almost looks like a mayfly a little bit. But if you weren't sure if it was a mayfly or a dragonfly, you could look under the head and see that labium, and you would know it would be a damselfly, an odonate, and not a mayfly. There are lots of other aquatic insects, common stream macrovertebrates, pond macroinvertebrates that you are probably familiar with on this slide. So up on the top on the left, you have a caddisfly, and in the middle is a helgramite, top right is a stonefly, and in the bottom is a mayfly. And then these macroinvertebrates are oftentimes food for the odonates, and in turn, some of them prey on the odonates. Probably that helgramite in the middle is something that could feed on a damselfly or dragonfly. In case you're wondering, yes, it is true. Dragonfly larvae or nymphs will eat fish, at least small fish, the fry, and they will certainly be able to feed on tadpoles and other vertebrates as well, at least some of the smaller ones. So since dragonfly and damselfly nymphs are in aquatic environments, it probably is an interesting question to you, since you know that many macroinvertebrates are good indicators of water quality. Think stoneflies and mayflies. The question becomes, are dragonfly and damselfly nymphs good indicators of water quality? And again, not a poll question, because it's a complicated question to answer. The answer is sometimes, depending on the species and depending on the habitat. Not all of them are great indicators. And let me explain what I mean. I don't think I knew this when I was first starting to study dragonflies and damselflies, but the species that are found in streams developing as nymphs are different species than the species that develop in lakes and in ponds. So in terms of the ones that develop in rivers and streams, those are generally pretty good indicators. They are not very tolerant of pollution. Like you see here, the Blacklick Creek, it's heavily contaminated with acid mine drainage. You can see some aluminum and some iron in that water. A stream like that that has a heavy pollution of acid mine drainage or even sedimentation oftentimes won't have a robust diversity of dragonflies or damselflies in it. However, they're not really good indicators of pond habitats. They're pretty tolerant. So the species that only live in ponds go through their development and can be quite tolerant of pollution. So the answer to the question, what are they good indicators? It just depends on the habitat and depends on the species. There's not a universal answer. If you were to say, are mayflies and stoneflies good indicators? The answer is certainly a resounding yes. Dragonflies, sometimes. I wanted to talk a little bit about the life cycle because that's such an interesting facet of their biology. You may have seen these around the edges of ponds. So that's called an exuvium. I mean, you've probably called it a cast skin or a shell of the dragonfly. So when it's time for them to complete their metamorphosis, they'll crawl up out of the water, find a stick or a branch or a blade of grass and complete their metamorphosis that way. I have a nice video here. It's narrated by David Attenborough, so I'll let him do the talking since he is a much better speaker than I am. And it's just a little clip, a very short clip of a dragonfly climbing out of the water and shedding its skin. That's what I wanted you to see. So that metamorphosis, obviously, that process was sped up. I mean, it'll take them many hours, sometimes almost a day, to complete that process. So you may have noticed, if you've ever seen a dragonfly, that doesn't fly very well when it's just emerged through that metamorphosis. It's not quite hardened up yet. It takes about 24 to 48 hours for the exoskeleton to solidify. And they're kind of in a vulnerable, soft state at that point. The wings aren't quite hardened up. The blood hasn't pumped through them. The body is softer. They don't have their full coloration yet. And we refer to those as tenorol or pre-adult dragonflies. Again, in the stage lasting about a day or two. And they can't fly really well in that state. Their coloration isn't quite complete. So this is the species we have around here that comes out late in the summer called the Halloween pennant. And as a tenorol, it's kind of got this cool yellow color, but then in a day or two, it'll harden to its darker orangish brown and black coloration, just to show you a stark difference in what the coloration of the body looks like as they harden up. When they are soft like that, when they're tenorol, they're pretty susceptible to predation. So I would imagine that most predation, at least from spiders and maybe from other insect, occurs that way. If you try to catch them in that state, it's often not a good idea because you can damage them or hurt their wings. So I tell students it's best to let them go in that stage. And then, of course, whenever you are flying like a dragonfly does, one of their main predators, of course, is birds. And birds are, again, if we try to think about it from a human perspective, what's the benefit of dragonflies to us? Well, in terms of the food web, they're very important links. So important food for fish, important food for birds, important food for lots of other organisms. Somebody had posted in the chat, it says it obviously doesn't hurt them when you grab them by the wings. And that's correct. Once the wings are hardened up, you can't really hurt them. What you wouldn't want to do if you were holding them is to hold them by the thorax or by one of the legs or the body itself. So just grabbing them by the wings is pretty safe. All right. So here's the rated R portion of our discussion today. So this is a pair of dragonflies mating, and I just wanted to kind of reemphasize, you see this odd position called the wheel position with dragonflies. The male is the insect on the right facing us. Again, we told you before that his reproductive organs are right behind the thorax on the front part of the abdomen, and he has placed a sperm packet there. The female is the insect below that curls up to receive that sperm packet, and they kind of will fly around often in this case, said to be in tandem. And it's not uncommon that you would see this position. Here you see a couple damselflies mating. Commonly observe that during the summer whenever they're reproducing. Sometimes the males will guard the females. The male is on the left. He still has a hold of the female On the right, even though they are done mating, now he's guarding her as she lays her eggs, and she's inserting them into some dead cattails. And sometimes the females will just lay the eggs without a male guarding them. This is a similar species, but not the same species. And she's just ovipositing or egg laying right into the cattails themselves. Some dragonflies will just spread their eggs randomly over the surface of the water and not insert them into a plant. This is a basket tail, and this is the tip of the tail of the insect. And she's just got a bunch of loose eggs, and she'll fly down and just kind of tip her tail to the water to let the eggs go. It's a terrible video, but here you see a couple dragonflies in tandem, and they're just, the female is going down to the water and tapping her eggs and releasing those eggs into the water. All right, we've come to the fourth question, a cultural question. So why is a dragonfly called a dragonfly? Because they're strong and powerful like dragons, because they can fly fast like dragons, because they were once considered evil, or because some species can breathe fire. Kind of an interesting question, why a dragonfly is called a dragonfly. All right, so looks like we've got everybody zoned in. And although they are strong and powerful and they can fly fast, just like mythological dragons, the real reason that they were called dragonflies is because in the Middle Ages, they were thought to be agents of evil. So dragon in this case refers to the devil. It's really interesting how they've had some different names for dragonflies over the years. So in the Middle Ages, they were called the devil's riding horse, or water witches, or goblin's fly. And there are darners still today, and it comes from the old wives' tale that a dragonfly would come around and sew your eyes shut if you've been a bad little child or something like that. So the darning that you saw was really probably just the up and down motion of a needle as they were laying their eggs in the water. So interesting that they thought that they were associated with evil, that they were evil creatures. So that's where the word dragon originally came from. I like to think that dragon is a better name for a powerful flying creature, just like the mythological dragons of Lord of the Rings or something like that. They've also had some other horrible names like horse stingers and snake servants and eye pokers and ear cutters. And if you go and you talk to kids especially, the number one question you always get is, do they bite or sting? And the answer to the second part of that, do they sting? It's a resounding no. They don't have a stinger. I don't think they could sting you if they wanted to. And do they bite? And the answer is not unless you stick your finger in their mouth. They are very kind of docile creatures and not very aggressive at all. The insects that are usually the most aggressive, like bees and wasps and things like that, are usually social insects, and dragonflies are not social insects at all. So there isn't really a threat to them. Even if you're handling them, they won't go out of your way, won't go out of their way to bite you. So it's not really something you have to worry too much about. I suppose if you were careless, one of the big dragonflies could give you a pretty good nip on your finger, but I've never experienced that. They're pretty harmless creatures overall. Look kind of scary, sure. Are they really very dangerous? Not at all. So we come to our last question. I wanted to just slip a little bit about species diversity. So how many kinds of dragonflies and damselflies total are there in the world? So how many species do you think? This is hard to do because I know you don't have any reference point, but just give it a guess. 600, 6,000, 600,000, or 6 million? All right, I think everybody's pretty much locked in. Good. And most of you got the correct answer. The correct answer is about 6,000 species. It's a lot and it's not a lot. So 6,000 species, yes, it's a lot of different kinds of insects. And that's split pretty evenly between numbers of dragonflies and damselflies. About 50% of the order is split between those two. So 6,000 species, but that's not that many species in terms of insects. There's over 1 million species of insects, so it's actually one of the smaller groups of insects. To give you some comparison, there's nearly 400,000 species of beetles alone. So dragonflies and damselflies, the Odonata, it's a pretty small group, just 6,000. It's still a lot. I mean, it's more species than probably the number of mammal species there are in the world, but still fewer than, for instance, the number of bird species there are in the world. So you might be wondering, you've seen a lot of the images in this slideshow of ones in Pennsylvania. There are about 180 species in Pennsylvania. So of those 6,000, it's a pretty small number in Pennsylvania. I like that number because it's manageable. It's not hard to learn them. They're very visual creatures. It's easy to identify them by sight, kind of like birding. So a good field guide, and you can learn the local species pretty quickly. It's not that difficult. There are a couple tricky ones, of course, that you need to look more closely at, but most of them are pretty large and showy, and it's easy to tell them apart. So about 180 or so in Pennsylvania. In our local counties around here, Cambria County, for instance, has about 75 species, and I'm working on Blair County. I'm going to be doing a survey with some students over at Canoe Creek this summer. So I hope to get that number a little bit higher as we discover some of the species that reside here. But in general, maybe between 70 and 80 species is a common number for some of our local counties in the Laurel Highlands. I wanted to share just a couple other quick points, and I'll get to some resources for you and wrap things up. Like birds, dragonflies show sexual dimorphism, meaning the males and the females often are differently colored. So everybody knows the white-tailed deer, but did you know there's a white-tailed dragonfly? It was probably around a lot longer than deer have been. There's the male, and there's the female. See the color difference? So many dragonfly species have that dimorphism, whereas I mean, it probably just is an indicator that the females are doing the mate choosing, that the males are more brightly colored. Not all species, but many. And then some people always ask me, what's the longest or what's the largest and smallest species that we can see around here? This fierce beast here is our smallest dragonfly around these parts. That's the eastern amberwing. You'll see these flying around ponds, especially late in summer, and they have about a 1-inch body length, maybe a 1.5-inch wingspan. They're pretty tiny. So imagine 1 inch, that's not a very big dragonfly. And the biggest dragonfly that you'll see commonly is the common green darner, but this one's even a little bit bigger. It's a fairly rare dragonfly called the comet darner, and it might be one of the most beautiful dragonflies I've ever seen. Only occasionally have I been able to catch it. I've seen it at a couple spots around Cambria County, and it's about 3.5 inches in length, maybe about 4.5 inches in wingspan. And you can see my hand there as a comparison for size. So pretty neat dragonfly. If you wanted to start learning some of the dragonflies, of course, I recommend some field guides. I know Michael said that he has this one, and it's what we always, recommend as a very thorough yet well-written and beautifully illustrated beginner's guide, and that's the Stokes Beginner's Guide to Dragonflies. It won't have every species, but it will have the common species, both damselflies and dragonflies in the eastern US. That is a good way to start and learn some of the more, the ones that you're most likely to see. Once you get a little bit more advanced, I recommend Dennis Paulson's book, Dragonflies and Damselflies of the East, which has images of every single species, hundreds of species in that. So both books are fairly inexpensive. The Stokes guide is only about $10, and the Paulson guide is about $20. But those would be my two recommendations for resources. In terms of projects you could do with students, I think just observations are great. We've talked about a lot of the behaviors you could see, telling the differences between dragonflies and damselflies, identifying the different kinds that you have around here, maybe looking in the water for the larvae. So if you have a pond accessible or some water or even just the field, you're likely to see dragonflies, and they are, so easily accessible in the fall, especially, that would be a neat little project you could do with students. Inexpensive aerial nets, the kind that you could catch butterflies with, would be good for catching the dragonflies. And the damselflies are very easy to catch. You don't need any particular skill with those. And if you wanted to get in and see what might be in your pond, a good aquatic net like you see in the picture. These nets run $20 to $30 if you're looking at costs. One online resource that is really, really good is Odonata Central. I don't have time to demonstrate it, but at least I'll mention it a little bit. That this is kind of like iNaturalist, if you're familiar with that, for people who study dragonflies, and it is linked up with iNaturalist as well. So it's a repository trying to keep track particularly of the dragonfly diversity in the United States. And it's free to use, and you can register. And once you are a registered user, you can take pictures of dragonflies that you've seen and upload them, and they can, the experts vet them, and you help build databases of sightings, so we know which dragonflies are in which counties and which states. You can see beautiful maps of those distributions and get checklists of dragonflies in a particular area, state, or county. And I think it's just a wonderful, easy to use resource that I highly recommend you check out. So it's very, very similar to iNaturalist if you're familiar with that. I promised Michael I would wrap things up with about 10 minutes to go. So I would love to have any questions that you had about anything you heard today. And I'll end there. So thank you for attention.
That was awesome. Well, thank you for sharing your expertise with us on this subject. It was really cool to see all the pictures and the pretty good diversity that we've got just even here in Pennsylvania.
Sure thing.
Do they eat all the time? Like, do they need constant food sources to survive, or can they catch something and that's good for like a week?
Probably not a week, but they don't necessarily need to feed as often as an endothermic organism like a mammal. So think ectotherm, your snakes and other insects and things like that don't have the metabolic demands. So in the summer when it's warm, they're probably eating more than larvae would be in a cooler environment, or the adults would be in the spring or fall when it's a little bit cooler. Jean wrote in the chat, how long can they live as adults? Usually a month or two. So you'll see some species that come out and they might last from May and June. You'll have other species come out in June and July. So the adults usually live a month or two. Total life cycle with the larvae can be years. So some species will go through a real quick development and their whole life cycle will be done in a couple months. Other species might take 5 years to go through their life cycle. It depends on the species. So hopefully we'll answer your questions. Does that make sense, Michael?
Yes.
Yeah, so not constantly, but the warmer it is, the more often they will usually feed. And the larger the dragonfly, the more often you see them feeding usually. I've got another chat question here. The question is migration. I'm not sure what you mean, but yes, there are some species that migrate. Not a lot, but a few of them. So they don't make a round trip migration. So the ones that come up here will lay their eggs and die, and then it will be a different generation that flies south. So the common green darners are a good example of that. Kind of reminds you of monarch butterflies more than bird migration. There's a species called the wandering glider that's a global species, and it's been known to migrate from Asia to Africa, something crazy like that. So pretty long distance migrations.
In terms of, say, long-term temperature patterns on the planet, are we finding that species are kind of moving into new areas?
They are. I haven't seen a lot, but I have some personal anecdotes of just doing some surveys in wetlands around here. We've seen a few species that would be more associated with Virginia and Maryland and the southern states. Now we're seeing them move up here into more commonly being seen in Pennsylvania. So kind of the verdict is out in terms of what that's going to mean, but we are seeing a little bit of some distribution shifts. That's why it's so important to have citizen science websites like iNaturalist and Odonata Central to keep track of those things. So even if they're really common species, it's good to have that data, and I encourage people to use that. If you have a sighting, you take a picture of one, upload it. We'll have that record.
Can you tell us a little bit more about like what research you do? I know you go out and have done some studies, and then do you involve students in some of the research?
Oh, sure. I'll try to be very, very brief, but I guess you could say some of the research I'm interested in is, like we've talked about, with distributions, which species are where and why. One of the research projects that I've been involved with is looking at the distribution of larvae, the nymphs, in acid mine drainage remediation sites. Obviously, it's good for the environment when you clean up acid mine drainage, but you also create passive wetlands in the process, and that creates habitat. So some of the work I've done has been looking at what diversity do you see, and it's actually very surprising diversity at these remediated wetlands. And then some of it is just behavioral kind of stuff. So how do some dragonflies survive cold temperatures better than other dragonfly species? Little ecological puzzles like that. So, one of the interesting things about them is how many questions there are that we still don't know about their behavior, about their ecology, about their evolution, about their physiology. So I don't think I'll ever be bored as a scientist with this group of insects. So those are just some examples of projects, and I certainly, students are welcome to get involved. I have some high school students involved in doing our survey work over at Canoe Creek this summer. So it'll be exciting to see what we see over there, and if we see any southern species moving up, and kind of remains to be seen. One of those puzzles of ecology.
Awesome, thanks. So do we have any other questions? Anything else you'd like to share, Dr. Loya?
No, thanks everybody for your attention. I hope you learned something useful, and be on the lookout for dragonflies this summer. Thank you, Michael, for hosting.
Yes, thank you for presenting, and thanks everybody for attending. I'm gonna put